Hello again, my loves. I was on my knees in aisle 7 when the entire restored Palace Theater decided I was a thief. Not quietly either. Not in the private way people ruin you when they still want to look kind. 219 guests had come for the reopening gala, all velvet jackets, crystal earrings, champagne flutes, and soft little gasps at the ceiling my hands had cleaned one painted cloud at a time. The old chandelier burned above us like a captured moon. Rain ran down the lobby glass in bright silver lines. On the screen behind me, one frame of a lost silent film hung frozen and warped. A woman's face melted at the mouth as if history itself had tried to silence her. Sloane Beck, chair of the Palace Restoration Board, held up a blackened strip of film between silver tweezers. "This," she said, voice made for donations and executions, "was found in May Larkin's locker." Every head turned. My knees pressed into the aisle carpet. My palms smelled of brass polish and cheap hand soap. My grandmother's old splicing block sat in my work bag under the seat beside me, suddenly feeling heavier than any heirloom had a right to feel. And then Vivienne Ashworth walked down the center aisle. The feared owner of Ashworth Pictures did not hurry. She never hurried. She wore black satin like a verdict, her dark hair pinned without mercy, her pale face unreadable under the chandelier light. People moved out of her way before realizing they had decided to. She stopped beside me, looked once at the ruined film, then once at my hands. "Everyone step away from the projector," she said softly, "and no one touches her." Let me go back, because that moment only means something if you know what I was, before the whole room learned my name. Before Vivienne Ashworth, I was a woman who made other people's magic look effortless. That sounds prettier than it was. I worked nights at the Palace Theater on Marlowe Street, half cleaner, half projection assistant, half unofficial archivist, which is too many halves for one underpaid woman, but exactly the sort of math old buildings survive on. My pay stub called me facilities support too. The projectionist Alvin called me kid, even though I was 28 and had once repaired a jammed platter system with a hairpin and an insult. The board called me the girl downstairs when they remembered I existed. My landlord called me on the 3rd of every month. That was the relationship with the most emotional consistency. I lived in a 4th-floor walk-up over a locksmith and a noodle shop that vented ginger steam into my bathroom every morning at 5:40. Rent was $1,475 if I paid before the 5th, $1,550 if I paid after, and the difference was the kind of number that rich people believed was small because it had never stood between them and groceries. I took the 11:18 bus to Marlowe Street 6 nights a week. If I missed it, the next one came 41 minutes later, and those 41 minutes had a way of making my whole life feel like punishment for needing transit. I owned 2 black work shirts, 3 pairs of black trousers, 1 pair of shoes with a split sole I kept gluing back together, and my grandmother's brass splicing block wrapped in a blue cotton handkerchief. The block fit in my palm, heavy, dull gold. Its grooves were worn from the pressure of years. My grandmother, Lydia Larkin, had been the projectionist at the palace before the multiplex killed half the city's old theaters and converted the other half into pharmacies with decorative ceilings. She could thread a projector in the dark. She could hear a bad splice before anyone saw it jump. She used to tell me that film was not fragile because it broke. "Everything breaks, Maybird," she would say, guiding my little hand along the edge of a strip. "Film is fragile because people think breaking is the end." She died when I was 19 with 3 unpaid bills clipped to the fridge and a library card used as a bookmark in a mystery novel. The splicing block was the only thing I kept that no creditor could make practical. My rule was simple: never stand in the beam. The beam was where dust became visible. Mistakes, fingerprints, the little floating evidence of a room not being as clean as it looked. I preferred the booth behind glass, the aisle after closing, the lobby before dawn. I preferred work that disappeared when done well. If people noticed me, it meant something had gone wrong. That winter, almost everything had gone wrong. The palace had been closed for 3 years after a ceiling leak nearly took down the west balcony. Then, Ashworth Pictures bought it, and suddenly the old theater was not dead, only awaiting strategic revival. Vivienne Ashworth's money arrived first, then the architects, then the marble specialists, then Sloane Beck with her donation dinners and her sharp perfume and her sharper belief that history should look expensive enough to deserve saving. The reopening centered on a film called The Ninth Lantern, a 1927 silent feature believed lost for almost a century until 6 reels appeared in a private collection in Lisbon, mislabeled as agricultural footage. Ashworth Pictures acquired them. The palace would screen the restored first act at the gala, then announce a full restoration campaign. It was all very grand. I mostly scrubbed gum from under seats. Still, I loved the palace with the embarrassing devotion people usually reserved for safer things. I loved the red velvet seats faded at the edges where thousands of hands had touched them. I loved the brass rail along the mezzanine, the one that warmed under my palm even in winter. I loved the projection booth with its square window high on the back wall, the little room where light became story because darkness agreed to hold it. That was my favorite part. The booth, not the screen, not the applause, the place where the light began. The first time I met Vivienne Ashworth, I was talking to a projector, not elegantly. "You dramatic old bastard," I whispered, with my elbow deep in the intermittent movement and my hair coming loose from its clip. "You have had 3 years to consider becoming reliable." A voice behind me said, "You speak to machines like you expect them to answer." I hit my head on the lamp housing. Hard. "God, sorry, I didn't. This area is staff only." Vivienne Ashworth stood in the doorway of the booth. I knew her from photographs, of course. Everyone did. 38 years old. Ashworth Pictures, Ashworth Restoration Fund, Ashworth Theaters in 6 cities. Magazine profiles loved calling her the Ice Patron, which sounded like something from a fairy tale where the village definitely died in Chapter 3. In person, she was worse. Not cruel-looking, not beautiful in any soft or generous way. Worse because she looked exact, as if every line of her had been chosen under pressure and held there by discipline alone. Dark hair, pale skin, black wool coat, a narrow silver pin at her throat shaped like a shutter blade. Her eyes were a gray so cool they made the booth feel warmer by contrast. She glanced at the open projector, then at the strip of leader between my fingers. "You hold film like it has a pulse," she said. That was her first line to me. Not hello, not who are you. "You hold film like it has a pulse." I should have said something professional. Something like, "Ms. Ashworth, welcome to the booth. Please don't stand near the rewinds in that coat." Instead, I said, "It does if you're responsible for killing it." Her mouth shifted, not a smile, the rumor of one. "I prefer clean deaths." That's comforting in an employer. "I am not your employer." Then that's comforting in a trespasser. Silence. For half a second I thought I had just lost a job I technically barely had. Then Vivienne stepped fully into the booth and closed the door behind her. The room became smaller, or I became more aware of its measurements. 14 feet by 10. 1 projector, 2 rewinds, shelves of cans, my hip against the bench, her 18 inches from the door. She smelled faintly of black tea and rain-polished brass. It was specific enough to annoy me. "I own the building," she said. "I clean the building. We all suffer." There it was. A smile. Small, immediate, gone. Her right hand lifted to the silver pin at her throat. 2 fingers touched it once, precise as punctuation, then dropped. Later I would learn that was her tell. Vivienne Ashworth touched that pin whenever she was deciding whether to trust, punish, or feel. At the time, I only noticed because I noticed hands. Hands told the truth rich people trained their mouths to avoid. "Alvin said the projector gate is sticking," she said. "Alvin says many things from the comfort of not being here. Can you fix it?" "I can persuade it." "Clean cut," she said. I blinked. "Pardon?" Her eyes stayed on the mechanism. "No ragged edges. Say what you mean." That was the first time I heard the tick. Clean cut. A phrase she used like a blade she had sharpened herself. "I can fix it," I said. "If no one from the board comes in and asks whether the projector can be made less noisy for donors." "Can it?" "No." "Good." Vivienne moved beside me to look inside the machine, not too close. Close enough that her sleeve nearly brushed mine. Her gaze followed the path of the film as if she understood more than I expected and less than she wanted. I wanted, absurdly, to show her, not because she was powerful, because she had looked at the film and seen a pulse. That was dangerous. The wanting, I mean. So I killed it quickly. "Ms. Ashworth, if you're looking for Sloane Beck, she's probably in the lobby terrorizing the florists." "I was looking for you." The booth made a tiny sound, or I did. "Me?" She reached into the pocket of her coat and removed a cream envelope. No logo, no flourish. My name written in black ink with the kind of handwriting that made even the letters behave. "I need a private restoration assistant for the 9th Lantern materials," she said. "Nights, 6 weeks. You would report to me, not the board." I stared at the envelope. "Why?" Because Alvin is retiring, the official restoration team won't arrive until after the gala, and you relabeled 37 cans in the archive last month using a system that actually made sense. My face went hot. You saw that? I saw the labels. I did not understand the small drawings of moths. They were not moths. No, they were lanterns. They looked like anxious moths. I should not have laughed. I did. Vivienne's eyes met mine for one beat too long, and the little booth seemed to remember it was built for fire. Then she held the envelope out. I did not take it. I have a job. This is a job. I have a badly paid job that knows where to put me. This one pays better. That is usually how traps introduce themselves. Her fingers touched the silver pin once. Clean cut, she said. You are good. You are underpaid. You know this building's hidden rooms better than the architects. You understand film as material, not romance. I need that. Praise, when delivered quietly by a woman who never wasted words, could feel less like warmth and more like danger. I looked away first. I'm not qualified. No, she said. My stomach dropped. You're uncredentialed. That is different. I hated how much that landed. I hated how badly I wanted to believe her. Still, I said no. I said no, because I knew women like Vivienne Ashworth did not offer doors without owning the hallway behind them. I said no because Sloane Beck already disliked me for existing below the donor level. I said no because my grandmother had taught me to splice film, not survive proximity to a woman who could buy my building and probably have my bus rerouted. Then my landlord taped a pink notice to my apartment door 2 mornings later. Balance due. Late fee applied. Final warning. So I said yes. The contract required me to work 4 nights a week in the Palace archive and booth after my regular shift, which meant my days became a sequence of keys, wet sidewalks, vending machine dinners, and Vivienne Ashworth appearing in doorways at impossible hours. She did not haunt. Haunting would have been less punctual. She arrived each night at 9:07 after the board had left and the donors had been escorted through the safest pretty rooms. She wore dark tailored suits, black sweaters, sometimes a long coat beaded with rain at the shoulders. She brought 2 coffees from the place on Rook Lane, hers black. Mine wrong the first 2 nights, then correct forever after. Oat milk, cinnamon, no sweetener, lid half loosened because I always burned my tongue and pretended not to. She never mentioned learning the order. That made it worse. The first ritual was inspection. We would stand at the rewind bench under the green-shaded lamp while I checked edges, shrinkage, old splices, warped sprocket holes. Vivienne watched with her arms folded, face still enough to make statues feel fidgety. You hover, I told her on the 4th night. I supervise. You loom. I fund. You glower. I breathe. Not warmly. Her mouth twitched. Little vandal. I looked up. Excuse me? She tapped one finger against a canister label where I had drawn another tiny lantern. You deface archival materials. I improve morale. You draw nervous insects. They are lanterns. They have wings. Light can have wings. The booth went quiet around that, not awkward, charged. Vivienne looked down at the label, then at me. Careful, she said. With the film? With making better arguments than mine. I smiled before I could stop myself. Her eyes caught on it. That was the first rung, though I did not know we were climbing anything then. Eyes catching across a small room. Light trapped in glass. My body noticing what my mind refused to organize. The second ritual was the seats. The palace had 1,104 of them, if you counted the balcony boxes and the 2 broken seats in row Q that Sloane insisted did not exist because broken things were apparently a public relations issue. I had to check row plates after the upholsterers replaced the damaged cushions. Vivienne decided to help. No one asked her to. No one who valued their survival would have suggested it. She appeared at the end of row D with her sleeves rolled and a clipboard in hand. I stared. Do you know how to count seats? I run a company with 600 employees. That isn't a yes. I can count. 3 rows later, she skipped D14. I made a sound. Vivienne turned slowly. Do not. I said nothing. You breathed smugly. I would never. Little vandal. Little miscounter. Her eyebrows lifted. Powerful women were not supposed to look startled in empty theaters at midnight because a cleaner with cracked shoes had teased them. Yet there she was, one hand resting on the back of a red velvet seat, black tea and brass in the air between us, looking almost young for half a second. Then the lobby doors opened somewhere below, and Sloane Beck's voice floated through the dark like perfume overwrought. Vivienne's face closed. That was how I learned the thaw was selective. To the world, Vivienne Ashworth was winter marble. To me, sometimes she let a match strike. If you're still here with me, my loves, subscribe so you don't miss the next GL story. Now back to the palace, because this is where the light started getting dangerous. The third ritual began by accident, which is how most honest rituals begin. A storm pushed rain under the alley door and into the basement archive. Not much, not cinematic, no dramatic flood roaring down the stairs. Just a thin, shining creep of water spreading across concrete toward the lower shelves where old lobby cards slept in acid-free boxes. I found it at 10:38 and swore so loudly the building probably added it to the historic record. Vivienne arrived 4 minutes later in heels that cost more than my rent and stepped directly into the water. "Sandbags?" she asked. "Boiler room, left of the furnace." "Dehumidifiers?" "2 working, 1 decorative." "Call list?" "On the clipboard by the stairs." Her eyes met mine. "Good." Not "thank you." Good. Somehow it was better. We moved for 47 minutes without stopping. I lifted boxes, she hauled sandbags, I found the leak source. She called the emergency contractor in a voice so quiet that the man on the other end began apologizing before she finished the first sentence. When Sloane arrived in a camel coat and panic, she looked at me standing barefoot on a dry crate, trousers soaked to mid-calf, carrying a box of lobby cards against my chest. "For God's sake," she snapped. "Why is she handling collection materials?" Vivienne did not raise her voice. The whole basement lowered itself to hear her. "Because she noticed the water before your preservation consultant did." Sloane flushed. "I only meant, no, you meant to reduce competence to class because it frightened you in someone you usually ignore." The contractor stopped moving. I stopped breathing. Vivienne turned to him. "Replace the door seal by morning. Submit the invoice to my office. If the phrase pre-existing condition appears anywhere in it, I will buy your company and close it out of irritation." Then she looked at me. The change was impossible. 1 second, cold enough to frost steel. The next, her gaze dropped to my bare feet and her voice became so gentle it almost undid me. "May, sit down. I'm fine. You are bleeding." I looked. A slice crossed the side of my foot where I must have stepped on a broken tile. Blood mixed pink with rainwater on the concrete. "Oh," I said. "That's inconvenient." Vivienne took off her coat and laid it over a crate without looking away from me. "Sloane," she said. "Leave." Sloane left. That was power, I thought. Not shouting, not threatening for display. Just making a room understand the door had opened. Vivienne knelt in front of me with the first aid kit while I sat on the crate feeling every strange, hungry eye in the basement pretend not to watch. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know. I can bandage my own foot. I'm certain." "You're still doing it." "Yes." She cleaned the cut with antiseptic. I hissed. Her hand paused. "Sorry," she said. The word "from her" sounded unfamiliar, like she had taken it out of storage and found it still worked. Her fingers were cool, careful. She wrapped gauze around my foot, then removed her own black socks from her bag, because apparently Vivienne Ashworth carried spare socks like a woman preparing for either disaster or intimacy, and rolled one gently over the bandage. I stared at the top of her head. No one had knelt for me in years. People knelt near me, dropped things, tied their shoes, vomited into trash cans on late buses. Not for me. The wanting in that moment was not clean, it was not elegant. It was the brutal wish to touch her hair, to put my hand against the stern precision of her, and see whether she warmed under my palm. I did not. She looked up. Her face was close enough that the rest of the basement lost focus. "Pain?" she asked. "Yes." Her eyes sharpened. "Foot?" I swallowed. "Among other things." For one suspended second, her hand stayed around my ankle. Bare skin. Warmth. The first touch she had initiated with me that had nothing to do with work or emergency. Then the contractor dropped a metal bucket, and the sound split the moment open. Vivienne stood. I looked at the floor. The retreat was less complete than it should have been, because for the rest of that night, every step I took was in her socks. The fourth ritual belonged to the old theater organ. The palace had one, though it had not been fully playable in years. It rose from the orchestra pit on a lift no one trusted, all ivory keys and colored stop tabs arranged in a horseshoe around the console, more machine than instrument and more creature than machine. During restoration tours, Sloane called it a charming relic. Vivienne called it unfinished work. I called it temperamental royalty, and apologized whenever I bumped the bench. One Thursday after midnight, I found Vivienne sitting at the console in the half-dark auditorium. Not playing, just sitting with her hands folded in her lap. The chandelier was off. Work lights glowed along the aisles. Rain whispered against the high-stained glass. The stage curtain hung closed, red and heavy as a secret. I should have gone back upstairs. Instead, I walked down the aisle. "You look like you're about to fire the orchestra." "There is no orchestra." "That never stopped you." Her fingers touched the silver pin at her throat. "Once. My mother wanted to sell this," she said. "The organ?" "The palace. The organ. The archives. Anything that required patience without immediate profit. But you bought it." "I bought many things." "Clean cut," I said softly. She looked at me then. The tick reflected back to her. A little startled, a little exposed. I stopped beside the console, not touching her, not touching anything. "I wanted to play," she said. I was quiet. Vivienne's gaze moved over the keys. "When I was 9, my father brought me here for a Saturday matinee. The organ rose out of the pit before the cartoon. The whole room laughed because it was ridiculous and grand and too much. I decided, very privately, that if I ever became extraordinary, it would be like that, rising out of the dark making noise. The image hit me so hard I had to grip the seat in front of me. Vivienne Ashworth, age 9, wanting not to own the theater, wanting to be the sound. "What happened?" I asked. "My father died. My mother turned grief into acquisition. I became useful." There it was, the quiet wound beneath the perfect coat. We stood in the hush. The wanting that night was her hand on the keys, her younger self under the armor. The sentence I could not say. I know what it is to become useful and call it survival. I sat beside her on the organ bench, leaving 6 inches between us. Her shoulder did not touch mine, then slowly it did. Shoulder to shoulder. No ceremony, no apology. Her breath changed. Mine followed. The room held us in red velvet and rain. "Do you still want to?" I asked. "Play?" "Yes. I don't remember how." That wasn't the question. She looked at me. Our eyes met too long this time, and neither of us corrected it. Her mouth parted as if she might say something unwise. The side door opened. Sloane's assistant called, "Ms. Ashworth? The Tokyo call is asking for you." Vivienne closed her eyes. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because if I did not laugh, I would understand how close I had come to leaning in. The 5th ritual was less a ritual than a problem named Cora Venn. Cora had been my girlfriend for 11 months and my mistake for about 9 of them. She wrote cultural criticism for the city paper, the kind that used words like urgent and liminal, and never once paid for dinner on time. She loved the idea of me in hidden rooms. She loved telling people I worked inside cinema history. She did not love that cinema history paid less than her freelance coffee budget. When we broke up, she wrote a review of a revival screening and referred to me, anonymously but obviously, as the palace's resident dust nymph. Everyone at work read it. Alvin printed it and taped it to the booth door until I threatened to replace his chair with one from storage that leaned left. Cora reappeared 3 weeks before the gala wearing red lipstick and a press badge because the universe has a childish sense of humor. I was in the lobby with a ladder, replacing bulbs in the marquee sample letters. Vivienne stood below, allegedly reviewing exterior signage, actually holding the ladder so firmly that no act of God or poor city maintenance could move it. Cora looked from me to Vivienne and smiled. "May Larkin," she said, "still climbing things for other women." My foot slipped 1 rung. Vivienne's hand moved to the small of my back, not my waist, not possessive, steadying. The warmth of her palm went through my work shirt, my skin, whatever poor defense I had left. "Careful," she said. Cora noticed. Of course she did. "And Ms. Ashworth," Cora continued, "how generous of you to preserve the working class as part of the building." Vivienne looked at her. There were winters with more mercy. "Ms. Venn," she said, "your press access is for scheduled events, not staff harassment. I'm observing atmosphere. You are manufacturing one." Cora's smile sharpened. "Protective, aren't we?" Vivienne did not move her hand from my back. I noticed that. So did everyone within 10 feet. "I am precise," Vivienne said. "There is a difference." Cora glanced up at me. "Good luck, May. Women like this prefer their muses grateful." The word muse hit something old and humiliating. I started down the ladder too fast. Vivienne's hand stayed at my back until both my feet touched the floor. Then it left, and I hated the air for replacing it. "Don't," I said quietly. Vivienne's eyes came to mine. "Don't fight her for me." "I wasn't. You were." "No," she said. "I was correcting the room." The words should not have worked. They did. That was the second near kiss. Not in the lobby. Not under full light with Cora watching from the doors. Later. "Little Vandal," she said, and for the first time the nickname had no blade in it at all. The night we exchanged wounds, the palace lost power. Only for 23 minutes, but old buildings treat darkness like memory. Emergency lights painted the stairwells red. Rain battered the roof hard enough to make the ceiling clouds tremble. The backup generator took its time deciding whether we deserved civilization. Vivienne and I ended up in the projection booth with 2 flashlights, 1 blanket from the lost and found, and the 9th lantern's 3rd reel laid safely in a can between us. The city outside was a smear of wet neon through the tiny booth window. I sat on the floor because my foot still ached on long nights. Vivienne sat against the rewind bench, her knees drawn up, expensive trousers hopelessly creased. I had never seen her look less arranged. It made me ache. The wanting was simple that night, to rest my head against her shoulder and let the dark be dark. In the side corridor behind the ticket office, where the old plaster smelled of dust and rain, and the marquee bulbs glowed through the frosted glass like trapped stars, I was carrying a box of replacement bulbs. Vivienne came around the corner too quickly. We stopped inches apart. 1 bulb rolled loose and clinked against the floor. Neither of us bent. "May," she said. Just my name. Her gaze dropped to my mouth. I forgot the box in my hands, forgot Cora, forgot rent and buses and the rule about the beam. Vivienne lifted 1 hand, stopped before touching my face, and waited. A question without words. I moved toward her. The lobby doors slammed open. Sloane's voice sliced through the hall. "Vivienne, we have a problem with the donor seating chart." Vivienne's hand closed in the air, then dropped. I laughed once, breathless and almost angry. "Your donors are committed to abstinence." Her mouth curved, but her eyes did not leave mine. Instead, I held my grandmother's splicing block in my lap and traced the worn groove with my thumb. "Who taught you?" Vivienne asked. "My grandmother. The projectionist. You researched me?" I researched the building. Convenient overlap. Her fingers touched the pin. She was respected. She was feared by anyone who brought popcorn into the booth. That sounds like respect in practical clothing. I smiled. Then the smile left. She raised me after my mother decided motherhood was a role she had been miscast in. Vivienne said nothing. Good. I could not have survived pity just then. "My grandmother smelled like Pond's cream and hot dust," I said. "She wore men's cardigans with pockets full of screws. She believed every problem could be improved by tea, tape, or threatening the mayor. She taught me splicing on scraps from trailers. I used to think the booth was the safest place in the world because nothing got projected backward. You knew where the light came from. You knew where it was going." Rain hit the booth glass. "Then she died," I said. "And it turned out safe rooms are only safe while someone alive knows how to unlock them." Vivienne's face changed in the flashlight glow. Not soft. Open. "I'm sorry," I nodded. People kept saying she would want me to move on. I hated that. She would have wanted me to check the gate tension and eat something with protein. She was specific. Vivienne almost smiled. "She left debts," I said. "Not terrible ones. Just enough. I worked. I stayed invisible. I told myself invisibility was freedom because no one could ask anything of what they didn't see." Vivienne's voice was low. "You don't have to perform disappearance for me." There it was, the being seen line. It reached the place under my ribs where I stored every time I had laughed too quietly, wanted too little, accepted being useful because useful people were allowed to remain near the warmth. I looked at her. Her eyes held mine without demand. "What about you?" I whispered. The generator hummed somewhere below, tried, failed, quieted again. Vivienne looked toward the auditorium through the square window. In the emergency glow, the empty seats looked like witnesses. "My father loved rooms," she said. "Not buildings. Rooms. He said every room asked something different of a person. A church asked for confession. A station asked for departure. A theater asked for belief without proof. I loved him immediately for that and hated that he was dead. He brought me here when I was 9, she continued. I told you that. What I didn't tell you is that he died 7 months later. A stroke, at a board breakfast. He was 46. Her voice stayed level. Her hand did not. The fingers at her pin trembled once. My mother took over the company. She was brilliant, cruel when frightened, which was often. She believed grief was a private weakness that became vulgar if displayed. She taught me to be controlled before anyone could call me broken. I could barely breathe. I wanted music, Vivienne said. Scores, rooms full of sound. I wrote little pieces for films I made up in my head. Very dramatic, very bad. My mother found the notebook after my father's funeral and told me sentiment was what people sold when they lacked strategy. My hand tightened around the splicing block. I became strategy. The power came back then. The projector fan clicked. The booth lights flickered on, harsh and sudden. Neither of us moved. Vivienne looked almost embarrassed by the visibility. I knew the feeling. "Do you still write music?" I asked. "No." "Clean cut?" Her eyes met mine. "No," she said quietly. "Not clean." That was the relief. Not confession alone. Not the sad shape of it. The relief was that neither of us turned away from the other's ugly rooms. I wanted her hand. It lay on the floor between us, long fingers relaxed, palm down, 3 inches away. I did not touch it, but I did move my hand closer. She noticed. She moved hers closer too. The space between us remained. It also changed. The break came from the Gala program. That sounds small. It was not. 3 days before the reopening, I found the printed booklet stacked in the lobby office. Heavy cream paper, gold-embossed Palace Theater reopening gala, pages of donor names, board names, architect names, Vivienne's letter of welcome, Sloane's essay about cultural stewardship, which used the word community 4 times and named no one who worked after 6 p.m. The restoration page read, "The Ninth Lantern materials prepared under the direction of Ashworth Pictures and the Palace Restoration Board. No Alvin, no archive volunteers, no me." I told myself I had not expected credit. That was true. Then I realized expecting invisibility did not make it hurt less when someone handed it to you. I found Vivienne in the auditorium overseeing a lighting test. She stood in the center aisle, black coat over her shoulders, looking up at the chandelier as technicians adjusted the dimmers. "Did you see the program?" I asked. She turned. Something in my voice made her face still. "Yes." "My name isn't in it." A pause. Too small to be innocent. "No," she said. The aisle carpet seemed to tilt. "You knew." Sloane felt staff credits would complicate the donor narrative. I laughed. It came out wrong. "The donor narrative." Vivienne's jaw tightened. "May." "Clean cut, Ms. Ashworth." Her eyes flinched. "Good. I wanted that." "Did you agree?" I asked. Her silence answered before her mouth did. I chose not to fight that battle before the gala. There it was. Not a missed text. Not a misunderstanding. A value revealed under pressure. Strategy first. Me later. I nodded once. Technicians moved above us. The chandelier brightened, dimmed, brightened. A room practicing beauty while I learned my exact price. "I restored 12 minutes of warped footage you thought was unusable," I said. My voice shook. I hated that. I kept going anyway. "I found the splice error in reel 2. I caught the vinegar damage before it reached the lower shelf. I worked after shifts until my hands cramped, and you let them make me a ghost because it was convenient." Vivienne stepped closer. I stepped back. That stopped her more effectively than a slap. "I was going to correct it after the announcement," she said, "after the money was secured." "Yes." The honesty hurt worse than a lie. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For not insulting me by pretending it was protection." Her face had gone pale under the house lights. "May, the Restoration Fund affects 6 theaters. If Sloane pulls her donors—" "I know." I picked up my work bag from the seat where I had left it. "That's the worst part. I know the math. I know exactly why I was easy to cut." I walked toward the aisle, then stopped. Because dignity, my grandmother had once said, did not excuse leaving a projector misthreaded. "The print Sloane wants to show at minute 12 is too tight on the take-up," I said, not looking back. "If they run it that way, the old splice will jump, loosen the tension, or use the safety duplicate." Silence. Then Vivienne, very softly, "You're still giving me the useful answer." I looked at her then. "I know," I said. "That's what I'm trying to survive." I left the palace with my work shirt still on, and my grandmother's splicing block in my bag. Rain hit the sidewalk in hard silver needles. The bus came late. Of course it did. I stood under the shelter while water soaked through my split shoe and told myself not to cry where the traffic could see. Vivienne did not call that night. That was either respect or cowardice. For 3 days I did not go to the palace except for my regular shift, and when I did, I worked rooms she was not in. The building became enormous again, cold, full of doors. Cora texted once, "Heard Ashworth finally learned what you're good for." I deleted it. Sloane passed me in the lobby and smiled with all her teeth. I imagined my grandmother pouring tea directly into her handbag. On the morning of the gala, a courier came to my apartment. Not flowers. Thank God. Flowers would have lost Vivienne forever. The courier handed me a flat archival box and an envelope. Inside the box was the Palace program, reprinted. My name was on the restoration page, not hidden at the bottom. May Larkin, Archive and Projection Restoration Assistant. Below it were Alvin's name, the volunteers' names, even Marta from cleaning, who had found 2 missing seat plaques behind the radiator. In the envelope was a handwritten letter. May, you were right. I made you invisible because invisibility was strategically useful to me. I called it timing. It was cowardice in a tailored coat. I cannot undo the cut. I can make the next one clean. I have withdrawn my welcome letter from the program and replaced it with a restoration note naming every person whose labor made the building possible. Sloane is furious. This is not an apology. Fury costs me very little. The apology is this. I will not ask you to attend tonight. I will not ask you to forgive me where people can applaud the shape of it. I will not come to your door and turn your private hurt into my dramatic scene. Your pass is enclosed if you choose to come. If you do, your seat is beside mine. If you do not, it will remain empty. You once said the booth is where the light begins. I forgot that light does not belong to the person who owns the room. V. Under the letter sat a small object wrapped in blue cotton. My hand stopped, my grandmother's handkerchief. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was my brass splicing block, cleaned and polished, the grooves bright but not erased. A new felt backing had been fitted beneath it so it would not scratch the bench. There was no note explaining that part. That was the apology. Not the program, not the seat. She had taken the thing I loved, handled it with respect, and returned it more itself. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time with the splicing block in my lap, while the noodle shop downstairs steamed ginger through the walls. Then I got dressed. The reunion did not happen under the chandelier. It happened in the projection booth 21 minutes before curtain. Vivienne stood at the rewind bench in black evening wear, one hand at her silver pin. Her face changed when I came in. Not dramatically. She was too disciplined for that. But the stillness broke around the eyes first. You came, she said. I almost didn't. I know. I closed the booth door. The gala murmured below us, all champagne and velvet and money pretending not to sweat. Up here, the air smelled of warm dust, metal, rain on wool, and Vivienne's black tea brass scent. I placed the pass on the bench. I need terms, I said. Yes. I won't be your absolution. No. I won't be quiet because silence is convenient. No. If you choose strategy over me again, don't call it timing. Call it what it is. Cowardice, she said. I nodded. And I need to keep my job separate from whatever this is. I need credit for my work because it's mine, not because you care about me. Vivienne's voice went low. You have it. I'm not finished. Her mouth almost moved. I gathered. I can be afraid and still be here. You can be powerful and still be wrong. I won't let your mother's voice use your mouth, and you don't get to make my invisibility romantic. Vivienne closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were wet. I accept, she said. No bargaining? No. No elegant counteroffer? I am suffering. I laughed despite myself. Her face softened. The space between us tightened. We were not touching. Not yet. But the retreat had ended. I felt it in my hands, in my throat, in the way the booth seemed to tilt toward the screen. Vivienne lifted one hand, stopped. May I? She asked. My breath caught. What? She looked at a strand of hair fallen against my cheek. Tuck that back. It is bothering me with theatrical persistence. I should have said no to punish her a little longer. I did not. Yes. Her fingers brushed my cheek as she tucked the hair behind my ear. There are touches a body files under contact. There are touches it files under before and after. This was the second kind. Before we continue, a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, so some of the more intimate moments between these two women have been softened. The full uncensored version is on my Patreon, link in the description. The booth window framed the stage below, where Sloane had stepped to the podium. Her voice rose through the speakers, polished and warm and false. The gala had begun. Vivienne's hand lingered near my face, not touching now. May, she whispered. My name in her mouth had changed again. Not employee, not problem, not useful answer. Choice. I looked at her hand, then at her. You may kiss me, I said, because my grandmother had raised me to be clear around dangerous machinery. Vivienne inhaled once, slowly, as if the room had finally given her sound back. Then she kissed me. It was not like the films. There was no swell from the organ, no perfect angle, no soft focus making us prettier than fear. There was the warm square of the projection booth, the hum of the projector, the rain ticking against the tiny high window, and Vivienne Ashworth's mouth on mine with such careful restraint that I nearly broke from the tenderness of it. The first kiss was quiet. A question answered in breath. Her lips were soft, cooler than mine at first, then warm. She held herself still enough that I understood she was letting me decide the depth of it. That restraint, from a woman who commanded rooms by entering them, went through me like light through dust. I stepped closer. Her hand moved to my waist. I made a small sound I did not recognize as mine. She paused instantly. Still? She whispered. I nodded against her mouth. Still. The second kiss was less careful, not careless. Never that. It had relief in it, want. Anger softened into hunger. Apology made physical, but not used as payment. My hands found her shoulders, then the back of her neck, fingers slipping into the dark hair pinned so perfectly it had no chance against me. Her breath caught. That sound. God. That sound ruined every cold headline ever written about her. Vivienne's hand slid into my hair, holding my face as if I were something both breakable and equal. I had been touched before. I had been kissed in hallways, in cheap apartments, against the bitter back door of bars where music leaked out around us. I had never been held like a woman being chosen out loud before the words arrived. Below us, applause began for Sloane's speech. Vivienne smiled against my mouth. We are missing the gala, she whispered. You own it. I am told ownership is not attendance. Clean cut, I said. Do you want to go? Her forehead rested against mine. No. The word was one breath, then another. No. We stayed until the projector cue light flashed. The world returned because it had to. Stories begin in darkness, but they still have reels to change. I stepped back first. My lips felt warm. My hands shook. Vivienne looked less composed than I had ever seen her, and the sight was indecent in a fully clothed, emotionally catastrophic way. She touched her silver pin, then stopped herself. No, she murmured. What? I don't need armor for this part. She removed the pin and set it on the bench beside my grandmother's splicing block. Then we went downstairs. Vindication, when it came, did not feel clean. It felt like a projector jamming at full speed. The first act of the ninth lantern began beautifully. The restored image flickered silver across the palace screen. A woman in a dark street carrying a lantern through rain. Her face luminous with the old silent film intensity that made every emotion look carved from light. The audience went still in that way only theaters can teach people to be still. Then, at minute 12, the image jumped. Once, twice. My body reacted before thought. I was half out of my seat when the screen bloomed white, then black. A murmur moved through the room. Alvin cursed from the booth over the headset. Sloane stood near the side aisle with a look of rehearsed horror. Too rehearsed. Vivienne saw it when I did. Cora lifted her phone, also too ready. The old shame tried to grab me by the throat, the whole room turning. The girl downstairs, the dust nymph, the useful ghost. Vivienne's hand found mine on the armrest, not in front of me, beside me. What do you need? She asked. The question steadied me better than any defense. Booth, I said. We moved. People whispered. Cameras shifted. Sloane reached the aisle before us. Vivienne, she said, voice sharp under the silk. This is exactly why unqualified staff should never have been credited. Vivienne stopped. I felt the room lean in. She did not step ahead of me. She looked at me. I understood. Speak. So I did. The safety duplicate wouldn't jump like that unless the splice was altered after inspection, I said. Sloane's eyes flashed. You expect this room to believe you can tell that from here? No, I said. I expect them to believe I can tell it from the booth. Cora laughed softly. Convenient. I turned toward her. The fear was still there. So was I. You knew minute 12 would fail, I said. Cora's smile froze. The review draft you accidentally sent me this afternoon already described the interruption as a brutal metaphor for Ashworth's hollow preservation politics. The screening hadn't happened yet. A ripple went through the donors. Cora went pale under the lipstick. Sloane said, This is absurd. Vivienne's voice cut through the room, quiet and devastating. Ms. Beck, sit down. Sloane did not. That was her mistake. We went to the booth with half the board following, 2 security staff, and Cora pretending she had suddenly lost interest in culture. Alvin had the damaged section on the bench by the time we arrived. I looked once. My stomach settled. Not because it was good, because it was knowable. The splice was cut with scissors, I said. Sloane laughed. And? I held up the strip with tweezers. I use a guillotine splicer. Clean edge. This is ragged. See the diagonal stress line? Someone cut and rejoined it badly so it would hold through inspection and fail under tension. Vivienne stood beside me, silent. Not in front. Beside. I looked at Cora. You don't know film, but you know timing. Sloane gave you the failure point. Cora said nothing. Sloane's face hardened. You are a cleaner with delusions. There it was. The old door. The room waiting to see whether I would shrink enough to fit through it. I set the tweezers down. My name is May Larkin, I said. I cleaned this theater. I repaired its seats. I found water in its archive before your consultants did. I restored 12 minutes of the 9th lantern with my grandmother's splicing block, and 43 hours no one asked me to count. I am a cleaner. I am also the reason you had anything to show tonight. The room went quiet. Vivienne's hand brushed mine. One brief contact. Strength, not rescue. Then she spoke. Ms. Beck, your access to palace materials is revoked. Your board position is terminated pending formal review. Ms. Venn, your press credentials are revoked, and your editor will receive the pre-written review you prepared for an event you helped sabotage. Cora found her voice. You can't prove. The booth camera can, Vivienne said. Cora closed her mouth. I looked at Vivienne. You installed a booth camera? After the basement leak. For security? For Sloane. I almost smiled. You suspected her? I disliked her. Suspicion developed with evidence. Clean cut, I whispered. Vivienne looked at me then, in front of everyone, and the old phrase changed. Clean light, she said. It should have sounded ridiculous. It did not. The screening resumed 28 minutes later using the second safety duplicate after I rechecked the tension myself. The audience applauded when the image returned, but I stayed in the booth for the first 2 minutes because my niece had opinions about public bravery. Vivienne stayed with me. Of course people noticed. Let them. At 1:12 a.m., after statements and security and Sloane being escorted through the lobby she had tried to own by posture alone, I sat on the back stairs behind the stage with my head against the wall. Vivienne appeared holding a paper cup. Oat milk, cinnamon, no sweetener, she said. I took it. The lid was half loosened. Something in me gave. Not tears, not exactly. A loosening. I have a request, I said. Anything. Dangerous answer. I am learning. I looked at her black evening gown, the flawless hair now slightly undone, the woman who had removed her pin and not put it back on. I want to see the organ rise. Her face went still. Then young. Then afraid. May. You don't have to play. She looked toward the stage door, then back at me. Clean cut, she said softly. I want to. So at 1:38 in the morning, with the theater empty, except for Alvin, Marta, 2 security guards pretending not to cry from exhaustion, and me standing in the center aisle, Vivienne Ashworth sat at the old console as it rose from the orchestra pit. It was ridiculous. It was grand. It was too much. She placed her hands on the keys. The first notes trembled. Not perfect, not even close. But sound filled the palace from below, deep and wavering, the tremble of an old instrument waking under hands that remembered wanting. Vivienne played 8 measures of something simple, maybe a scale, maybe the beginning of a song, maybe a child's private dream surviving strategy. When she finished, no one clapped. That would have been wrong. I walked down the aisle. She looked up at me from the console, eyes wet, mouth unsteady. There you are, I said. She laughed once, broken and quiet. Then she reached for my hand. Months later, the palace learned ordinary joy. That is the part no one writes plaques about. They write plaques for donors, founders, restorations, scandals survived by strategic committees. They do not write plaques for the Thursday night ritual of Vivienne Ashworth putting my work shoes by the radiator because she noticed the soles stayed damp after rain. They do not engrave brass for 2 paper cups of cinnamon oat coffee balanced on the rewind bench. They do not list the miracle of a woman once known as the ice patron standing in line at the noodle shop below my apartment because I mentioned exactly once that ginger broth made late shifts feel survivable. But that was where love became real, not in the gala, not in the kiss. Those mattered. God, they mattered. But permanence lived in smaller rooms. Vivienne kept her edges, She still terrified contractors. She still made board members sit up straighter by entering conference calls. She still said clean cut when someone wasted 12 minutes avoiding a truth that could have taken 10 seconds. Only now sometimes she said it to herself, when she wanted to retreat, when strategy reached for her throat with her mother's hand, when she almost made distance look noble. Clean cut. Then she would tell me the truth. I learned not to vanish all at once. Some days I still tried. I would work too long, answer too politely, say I was fine in the same voice I used for clogged sinks and donor questions. Vivienne would look at me over the top of her glasses and say, "Little Vandal." By then, the nickname had lost its sarcasm. By then, it meant come back from wherever you have hidden. We kept the splicing block in the booth on a small shelf Vivienne had installed herself with more concentration than the task required. The new felt backing kept it steady. My grandmother's blue handkerchief lay beneath it. Sometimes before a screening, I touched the brass groove for luck. Sometimes Vivienne did too. She would have liked you, I told her one rainy April night. Vivienne handed me my coffee. Because of my wealth and excellent posture? Because you fear popcorn in the booth. A sensible woman. She would have called you severe. She would not be wrong. She would have fed you anyway. Vivienne's face softened. The projector warmed behind us. Below, the palace filled with people for a community screening of the Ninth Lantern's completed restoration. Not donors first this time, neighbors, students, retirees, the locksmith from under my apartment, Marta with her sister, Alvin, officially retired and unofficially unbearable, sitting dead center with a bag of contraband mints. Cora's career survived, though not unchanged. Sloane's did not survive as comfortably. I discovered vindication is satisfying for about 12 minutes, then you still have laundry. This was useful information. Vivienne and I had fought twice by then. Real fights, not dramatic ones. Once because she tried to solve my landlord problem by offering to buy the building, which led to me saying, "I am your girlfriend, not a distressed property." Once because I worked through a fever, and she became so cold with fear that I nearly mistook it for anger. We learned, badly, then better. We apologized without making apology a performance. We developed rules. No financial rescues without discussion. No disappearing into work as punishment. No using old wounds as legal precedent against the present. Love, I learned, was not the absence of machinery. It was maintenance with witnesses. That April night, just before the screening, I stood in the booth window and looked down at the audience. Dust floated in the projector beam, bright because darkness made it visible. I no longer hated that. Dust meant the room was real. Light meant nothing without something to touch. Vivienne came to stand beside me, shoulder to shoulder. "Full house," she said. "You counted? Twice? Correctly?" A pause. "Little Vandal." I grinned. Her hand found mine on the sill. Not hidden, not displayed. Simply there. On the screen, the first frame appeared. The woman with the lantern standing in rain, her face turned toward an unseen door. Vivienne leaned close enough that her breath warmed my ear. "Ready?" I looked at the beam. At the room. At the woman beside me who had once thought strategy was safer than music and had played anyway. At my grandmother's splicing block, steady behind us. At my own hands, no longer trying to disappear from the work they had done. "Yes," I said. "Hit the light." The projector opened its eye. The palace went still. The story began. And I finally understood what my grandmother had meant. Film is not saved because it never breaks. It is saved because someone patient learns where to let the light through.